My phone rang at 2:47 in the morning, and before I even answered it, some old animal part of my brain already knew whose voice was going to be on the other end, and that nothing after this call would be simple again. "Claire, it's Emma." The nurse's voice was calm in that trained, careful way that scares you more than screaming would. "She's stable, but I need you to come to Riverside now." I remember standing in my kitchen in my niece's borrowed rain boots. She'd left them by my door the week before, trying to get my arms into a coat that wasn't mine, and thinking, stable is a word they use so you don't hang up on them. By the time I got to the hospital, my 9-year-old niece was hooked to a monitor that beeped in a rhythm too fast for a child her size, her lips still faintly blue at the edges, an oxygen line taped under her nose. The doctor used words like anaphylaxis and delayed epinephrine administration, and we were fortunate. I sat beside her bed holding her small, cold hand, and I called her mother, my sister, Denise, 4 times before sunrise. She finally picked up on the 5th call. There was music behind her, laughter, the clink of glasses. She was at a resort in Turks and Caicos with her husband Rob, 3 days into a trip I hadn't even known they'd taken, because Emma had been staying with me for what Denise called just a long weekend. "Claire, you're so good with her." "Is she okay?" Denise asked, and I could hear she'd already decided the answer before I gave it. "She's stable now. But Denise, you need to come home. Tonight, if you can." There was a pause. Not the pause of a mother absorbing terror. A different kind of pause, calculating, almost annoyed. "We can't just leave, Claire. Rob has meetings the rest of the week. It's a work trip, the flights are non-refundable, and she's stable, you said so yourself." I stood in that hallway with the smell of antiseptic in my nose, and my niece's heart rate still uneven on a screen 20 feet away, and I felt something in me go very quiet and very still, the way water goes still right before it starts to freeze. "She almost died tonight," I said. "Don't be dramatic," Denise said. "You always do this." I didn't know, standing there, that those 4 words, "you always do this," were the opening line of something that would take away almost everything I loved before it was finished. To understand why that sentence cut the way it did, you'd have to understand what I had already given up for this family without ever being asked to. Our mother, Patricia, had a stroke 6 years ago, and I was the one who quit a marketing job I loved in Chicago and moved back to Ohio to care for her, because Denise had the girls, meaning Emma, who was 3 then, and a husband whose career apparently could not survive without Denise's constant presence. I never said it out loud, not once in 6 years, that I resented it. I told myself it was what family did. I told myself Denise would have done the same if our situations were reversed, though some small, unkind part of me already suspected that wasn't true. When our mother died 2 years ago, she left behind a modest but real inheritance, the house, some savings, and a trust meant primarily for Emma's future education, with Denise as trustee because she was, in our mother's words, better with numbers. I never questioned that. I had no reason to. I had my own small life, my consulting work, my apartment with the extra bedroom that had slowly, over the past 2 years, filled up with a twin bed, a shelf of chapter books, a night light shaped like a fox, because Emma stayed with me so often that it had simply become her second room without either of us deciding it formally. That was the truth underneath everything. I loved that child like she was mine, in the specific, aching way you love something you were never allowed to call yours out loud. Denise and Rob didn't come home the next day. Or the day after. They came home on the 4th day, tanned, a little hungover, Rob checking his phone as they walked into the hospital room where Emma, discharged by then, thank God, sitting up in my apartment eating dry toast because her stomach was still unsettled, sat curled against me on the couch, more comfortable in my arms than in her own mother's. And that was the moment Denise's face changed. I saw it happen. I watched jealousy move across my sister's expression, like a cloud passing over the sun, there, and then quickly hidden. "Come here, baby," Denise said, holding her arms out, and Emma hesitated, just for a second, just a child's small honest hesitation, before climbing down from the couch and going to her mother. That hesitation was the second thing that would matter later, though I didn't know it yet. What Denise said next, she said quietly, almost pleasantly, in the tone people use when they want something to sound smaller than it is. The doctor mentioned her EpiPen was expired. 9 months expired. She looked at me, not at Emma. You knew that, right? You've had her enough times. You would have known. I felt the air go strange in my chest. Denise, I didn't know. I didn't even know she had an EpiPen with her. You never told me where. It was in her backpack. Front pocket. Where it's always been. Her voice stayed calm, almost gentle, which somehow made it worse. I guess I just assumed, since you're always saying how close you two are, that you'd have checked something that basic. I want to tell you I said something strong in that moment. I didn't. I sat there with my mouth slightly open, replaying the last 6 months, trying to remember if I'd ever looked in that backpack, feeling the particular vertigo of being blamed for something you have no memory of and therefore cannot even defend yourself against with certainty. That's the thing about a well-placed accusation from someone who knows you, it doesn't need to be true. It only needs to make you doubt yourself for half a second, and in that half second, you've already lost the argument. Rob, standing by the door with his phone still in his hand, said nothing. He wouldn't meet my eyes. I noticed that too, though I didn't understand yet what it meant. It would have ended there, maybe, an ugly moment, a bruise between sisters that might have faded, except that 3 weeks later, Denise called a family meeting, as she called it, at Mom's old house, which Denise and Rob had been living in since the estate settled. She'd invited our Uncle Frank, our late mother's brother, and the closest thing our small family had to an elder, and she'd printed things out. Actual paper, in a folder, laid on the kitchen table where our mother used to do crossword puzzles on Sunday mornings. I've been going back through the trust records, Denise said, not looking up from the folder, and there are some withdrawals I can't account for. From around the time Mom was sick. Cash withdrawals, mostly, structured under $5,000 so they wouldn't trigger extra reporting. The room went very quiet. What are you saying? I asked, though some sick part of me already understood the shape of the sentence coming. I'm not saying anything yet. I'm asking. You had power of attorney over her checking account those last 8 months, Claire. You had access. And I know things were hard for you financially after you quit your job. Uncle Frank looked at me with an expression I hated more than anger would have been, pity, tinged with the beginning of doubt. I never took $1 that wasn't mine, I said, and my voice cracked in the middle of the sentence in a way I despised, because it made me sound guilty even as I told the truth. Nobody's accusing you of anything, Rob said quickly, which was, of course, exactly what people say right before they accuse you of something. Here is what I didn't say in that kitchen, because I didn't have the proof in front of me yet, though the memory was already surfacing, cold and clear. I remembered, 18 months earlier, helping our mother reorganize her files, and finding a withdrawal slip for $4,800, dated the same week Denise and Rob had put a down payment on a boat. I remembered thinking it was strange, and then letting it go, the way you let strange things go with family, because questioning it felt like an accusation you didn't want to be the one to make. I went home that night and I didn't sleep. I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop and I logged into the old joint account portal I still technically had view-only access to from my years of caregiving, and I started pulling old statements. Not to build a case. Not yet. I told myself I was doing it to clear my own name. But somewhere around 1 in the morning, staring at a pattern of withdrawals that lined up, month after month, with credit card statements for a boat loan, a country club membership, and 6 months before our mother died, a resort deposit in Turks and Caicos, I understood that I wasn't looking at my own guilt anymore. I was looking at someone else's. I want to be honest about something, because a person telling you this story owes you their weaknesses, not just their triumphs. There was a night, about a week after that kitchen meeting, when I almost let it go. I sat on the phone with Denise. She'd called to talk about pediatrician appointments for Emma, as though nothing had happened, and some tired, lonely part of me almost said, let's just forget the trust thing, let's just be sisters again. I missed her. Whatever she'd become, she was still the person who used to sneak into my room during thunderstorms when we were kids. That's the part revenge stories don't usually tell you, that even when someone has wronged you badly, some nights you'd still trade the justice for the relationship you used to have. But then Emma called me from her bedroom, whispering because her mother didn't like her calling me too much, and asked if I could come to her school thing on Friday because her mom probably had a work thing, and I heard. Underneath a 7-year-old's careful diplomacy, the outline of a small girl already learning which parent, which adult, to actually count on. And something in me hardened back into resolve. I didn't confront Denise. Not yet. Instead, I did something slower and, I'll admit, a little frightening in how calm it made me feel. I made an appointment with an estate attorney named Patricia Olson, no relation to our mother, just a strange small coincidence of shared names that I chose to take as a good sign, and I brought a folder of my own. Bank statements. The withdrawal slip I remembered and eventually found, tucked inside an old recipe box I'd kept from Mom's kitchen because I couldn't bear to throw it away. Photographs, going back years, of purchases that didn't match anyone's stated income. MS. Olson looked through it all with the flat, professional patience of someone who has seen this exact story 100 times with 100 different families. You understand, she said, that if this goes the way I think it might, this isn't really about you clearing your name anymore. This is a breach of fiduciary duty. As trustee, your sister has legal obligations to your niece specifically. If she's been withdrawing trust funds for personal use, that's not a family disagreement. That's something a court can act on. I sat very still in that office chair. Some old loyal part of me, the sister who'd quit her job, who'd sat through 6 years of being the reliable one while Denise got to be the beloved one, wanted to close the folder and walk away. But I thought about the EpiPen. 9 months expired, sitting in a backpack, because I now understood, looking at the pattern of withdrawals, money that should have gone toward Emma's needs had instead gone toward a boat and a resort and a country club membership that made Denise feel, for a few hours at a time, like the version of herself she'd always wanted to be. Do it, I said. Whatever's next. Do it. What came next wasn't a courtroom scene with gasps and dramatic reveals, because that isn't how these things actually happen. It was months of quiet paperwork. MS. Olson petitioned for a formal accounting of the trust, which, as trustee, Denise was legally obligated to provide. I remember the day the accounting came back, because Denise called me, not shouting, which somehow unnerved me more than shouting would have, and said, very evenly, "You did this." I asked a lawyer to look at some numbers that didn't add up, I said. You did the rest. You've always wanted her, Denise said then, and here, finally, was the sentence underneath every other sentence she'd said to me for 2 years. Since she was a baby. You've always looked at her like she should have been yours. I let that sit in the silence between us, because it was, in its own way, the truest thing she'd said to me in years, and denying it outright would have been its own kind of lie. I love her, I said instead. That's not the same as wanting to take her from you. But Denise, you left an expired EpiPen in her backpack because the money that should have replaced it went toward a boat. That's not about me wanting her. That's about you forgetting her. She hung up on me. I sat with the phone in my hand for a long time afterward, waiting to feel triumphant, and instead just feeling tired and sad, in the specific way you feel sad for someone you love who has become someone you no longer entirely recognize. The accounting, once it was fully compiled, showed just over $61,000 withdrawn from Emma's trust over 3 years, none of it accounted for by any legitimate educational or medical expense. Rob, it turned out, had lost his sales job 11 months before any of this started, something Denise had never told our family, had in fact actively hidden, telling everyone he was between opportunities by choice, while the mortgage on their house and the boat loan and the country club dues kept coming due regardless. The vacation to Turks and Caicos, the one they wouldn't leave, had been paid for in a lump sum, in cash, for months earlier, a kind of desperate, unsustainable performance of a life they could no longer actually afford, taken, I believe now, because some part of Denise needed one more perfect vacation before the numbers finally caught up with her. That's what made it not a cartoon. Denise wasn't cruel because she was evil. She was cruel because she was drowning, and some broken part of her had decided that keeping up appearances was worth more than the truth, and when the truth started to surface, the only way she knew to survive it was to point the accusation somewhere else, fast, before anyone could point it at her. I understood that, even as I refused to let it excuse what it had cost Emma. The court proceeding, when it came, was smaller and quieter than I'd imagined. No shouting, no dramatic gavel moment. A judge reviewed the accounting, reviewed MS. Olson's petition, reviewed a brief, uncomfortable statement from Rob admitting to the job loss and the withdrawals under gentle but firm questioning. Denise did not deny the numbers. There wasn't really a way to. She sat very still throughout, her hands folded, and I watched my sister, who used to sneak into my room during thunderstorms, shrink into herself in a way that gave me no satisfaction at all, only a strange, heavy grief. The judge removed Denise as trustee and appointed a neutral financial institution to manage what remained of the trust, with restitution ordered in structured payments. In a separate but related family court filing, 1 MS. Olson had gently, carefully suggested, and one I hesitated over for nearly 2 weeks before agreeing to, I petitioned for and was granted legal standing as Emma's secondary guardian and regular caretaker, not full custody. Not a dramatic severing of Denise from her daughter's life, but a formal, protected role that meant no one could quietly cut me out again the way Denise had started to after that kitchen meeting, limiting my visits, screening my calls. Uncle Frank called me after it was all finalized. He didn't apologize outright. Some men of his generation never quite managed the words, but he said, I should have looked at the timeline sooner. The boat came the same year your mother got sick. I noticed. I just didn't want to see it, and I understood that was the closest he could come to admitting he'd chosen comfort over questions, the way so many of us do inside families, until we can't anymore. Rob and Denise are still married, still in the house, still slowly repaying what the court ordered, though I hear from Emma, who tells me things a child tells the adults she trusts, without fully understanding their weight, that her parents fight more quietly now. In the kind of low, controlled voices adults use when they think a 9-year-old, now 10, can't hear them through a closed door. Denise and I speak, occasionally, mostly about logistics, school pickups, doctor's appointments, the shared calendar MS. Olson's office helped us formalize. It is not warm. It is not what it used to be. Some nights I still miss what it used to be, or at least what I always believed it was, before I understood how much of it had been built on my willingness not to look too closely. Emma has a new EpiPen now, 2 of them actually, one that stays permanently in her backpack and one that stays at my apartment, in the drawer of the nightstand beside the twin bed in the room that has, by unspoken agreement between all the adults involved, simply become hers whenever she needs it to be. Last month, she asked me, out of nowhere, while we were making pancakes on a Saturday morning, why her mom used to get so mad whenever she stayed over at my place too long. I thought about how to answer that for a long moment, flipping a pancake I didn't need to flip yet, giving myself the extra few seconds. I think I said finally, your mom was scared of losing something, and she went about protecting it in the wrong way. Grown-ups do that sometimes. We get scared, and instead of asking for help, we push people away, or we blame the wrong person. Emma considered this with the serious, uncomplicated fairness only children still seem to have unreservedly. Were you scared too? Every day I told her, honestly, because I'd promised myself somewhere in the middle of all this that I would never lie to her the way the adults around her had learned to lie to each other. But I stayed anyway. That's the part that matters. She nodded, satisfied in the way kids are when an answer feels true even if it isn't complete, and went back to arguing with me about how many chocolate chips one pancake could reasonably hold. And I stood there in my kitchen, syrup warming on the stove, this small stubborn girl who was never legally mine but who had, somewhere in the exhausting, heartbreaking middle of the last 2 years, become the truest family I had. And I understood that the $61,000, the trust accounting, the court order, none of it had ever really been the point. The point had been an expired EpiPen in a backpack, and a phone call at 2:47 in the morning, and a sister who chose a resort over her own daughter's hospital bed, and me, finally. Choosing to stop doubting what I'd seen with my own eyes simply because the person responsible shared my blood. Family, I've learned, isn't the people who happen to be seated at your table. It's the people who show up when the phone rings at 3 in the morning and stay in the room even after the beeping stops.